Welcome to the Power 2 Pod. My name is Andy,
And I'm Jason.
and this episode we're going to talk about our most annoying fan bases that we encounter, some over-unders that we like, and the best portal fits that we can find in the Big Ten and the SEC. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, for my most annoying fan bases, I'm going to start with a couple of outside looking in. I'm going to start with Pitt and Clemson for me are two annoying fan bases I'm not going to include in my top three. With Penn State and Pitt, they're rivals and get a lot on Twitter. There's a whole lot of back and forth with Pitt fans that get kind of annoying, especially when their team goes 3-9 and has really only had one good season in the last few. And then Clemson fans, my beef with the Clemson fans is how they come to back up Dabo. If you say one little thing about Dabo, they're coming in bunches, no matter how little the criticism was or how big the criticism was. If you mention Dabo, Clemson fans are coming after you.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing with the Clemson thing is like they play hardcore into the underdog. Everybody's after us. And, when they were having their huge success in the playoffs, it's just like, everybody's counting us out. It's like, you've been here 3 of the last 4 years. You're not an underdog right now. But they like to play that card.
Yeah, they do. Clemson loves playing that underdog card. No matter number one in the country. Yeah, we're underdogs. Nobody thinks we can actually win. And then Pitt plays the opposite. Pitt plays the opposite. They think they're better than they really are. And they'll go lay an egg against Western Michigan.
Exactly. One of my biggest outside looking in ones is Notre Dame, and the biggest I think issue is that they just don't have any. They're not in a conference, so no conference championship games. They're relevant because they get to pick their own schedule, and then at the end of the year they're 11-2 or whatever, and then they just get blown out in the playoffs. They made the playoffs twice, and Clemson smoked them like 30-3, and then they actually made the national championship game against Alabama before the playoffs and got absolutely murdered. So, like, a Notre Dame is just another one that
Manti Te'o and his fake girlfriend,
invisible girlfriend, yeah. And then my other one is Miami out of the ACC. They used to be super relevant in the early 2000s. Since they made the move to the ACC, I think they've had one appearance in 2017. They don't have the reputation that their fans think they do.
Right. There's not a whole lot of people throwing up the U anymore. You get more people throwing you down than throwing you up.
Yeah, and like I said, they're a team that still recruits really well. State of Florida is very recruitment friendly, and they still just are not relevant.
Yeah. My favorite part is like they've really embraced the NIL, and it really hasn't seemed to matter yet. Like they're getting some big recruits, but they're not blowing the recruiting rankings out of the water yet.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, now let's jump into our actual rankings. Number 3, I have USC as my third most annoying fan base in the USC. And what's funny about that is they're brand new to the Big Ten. So haven't had too much interaction with them before basically this offseason. But they strike me they're very much Michigan-esque before they started beating Ohio State. Back before, Michigan got good and started cheating and got it good. They were always talking big, and then they'd never win the big game. And now, USC is out here. You got their fans. I mean, rightfully so. Who's not talking about their team, making the conference title or something like that. But they're just so confident about it, and they're so confident in Lincoln Riley, who, I mean, he had the Heisman winner in Caleb Williams last year, and they didn't look good at all last year. But the fans, they're really something. They go back and forth with Oregon a lot, and it's quite hilarious because, Oregon's had the upper hand for the better part of a decade against them. One of my third most annoying fan base is USC for me.
Yeah, for sure. And they're another team that, has that huge brand for college football, but they haven't even been in the playoffs. Like you said, can't win big games when they need to. So it's hard to really back up that program. as a fan when you're cocky and think that you have the world in your hand and you don't.
Yeah, like they're one of those teams that they think their brand is bigger than it is. And I mean, being a Penn State fan, they've gotten a couple of recruits from us. They've gotten, David Bally was actually going to go there, but he ended up going to Michigan. He decommitted, recommitted. But yeah, like the last couple of years, USC and us have been in the final two for players, and end up going to USC, and it comes out it's NIL or this or that. So had some interactions with some USC fans, and they're just not happy people.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting kind of to see with the Pac-12 teams coming in from the West to the Big Ten if they can really kind of target and take away from those the mid-western states, because they can go play out west, but they'll come back home and play against your Michigans, against your Penn States, against Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of expand the recruiting pool joining the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I mean, it could work the opposite way. You could get more California kids coming to the Midwest and East Coast because, hey, we're going to play out west, 2 games a year or whatever it is. So it could go either way. It'll be interesting to see how that dynamic breaks out.
Yeah, absolutely. Going on to my ranked would be Florida is my third most annoying fan base. Obviously, as a Georgia fan, it's a little bit of a internal hate on Florida. They're just annoying. Like I said, over the last few years, they've been really struggling recruiting wise, coaching wise, playing wise. They are on the struggle bus. And they like to throw shade at Georgia, like, oh yeah, we recruited these guys right out of your backyard. We got a 4-star. We got a this, that, and the other. And it's just like, yeah, because they wouldn't play at Georgia, and that's why you got them.
Yeah. Florida's interesting. I mean, they really haven't done a whole lot since the Tim Tebow days, on the field. I know, I see Florida, Penn State gets a couple Florida guys every year. And, anytime Penn State signs somebody from Florida, it's always, we didn't really want him or this or that. And, when it's, if you didn't want him, well, we'll take him,
Yeah, exactly.
Going to my number 2 and most annoying fan base, it's Michigan. Now, if we were doing this poll in 2020, Michigan wouldn't even be on the list because they weren't really that annoying back then. But since they got good, and now that they won that national title, they're riding high and saying all the things they were afraid to say before. Even though the cheating scandals, still to be determined on what some penalties on that's going to be. Their fans are riding high and mighty and don't think anything's going to happen at all from all the cheating allegations. And then, Penn State always has the saying, Michigan still sucks. People would post a picture, being in Greece, and the caption would be Michigan still sucks. We've gotten away from that the last couple of years because Michigan doesn't suck anymore, so it's kind of not fun to do anymore. But if you get on Twitter, the amount of bandwagon Michigan fans that have come about too, that's a big thing too. Is there wasn't this many Michigan fans in 2019, 2020 when they were trying to fire Jim Harbaugh, and now all of a sudden, every team's got bandwagon, but Michigan seems to have a ton of bandwagon fans that just come around when they're good, and when they're not good, they're nowhere to be found. So that's why I put Michigan at number 2 for my most annoying fan bases in the Big Ten.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of agree with that, with the fans kind of using, like the Michigan tradition and the Michigan like prestige, especially like academically. Like they'll almost use it as like a backhanded compliment. It's like, we're really great at football, but we're also academically superior to other people. But then like when it comes to NIL and recruiting, it's like sometimes we can't get the best player because they don't meet our academic standards. It's like you can't promote that and then use it as an excuse of why you're losing out on some recruits.
Right. And the other thing you get with the Michigan fans and the they always complain about the academic standards, but like Northwestern, Northwestern's not out here touting their academics when it comes to football. Like, they keep the two separate. They know they're a great academic school, not good at football, but they keep the two separate. Where Michigan kind of, well, we're the best academically, and now we're best at football. So it's just one of those annoying things. Like, football and the academics, fans don't care about the academics. They care about football.
Yep, exactly. For my second most annoying would be Oklahoma. With them coming into the SEC this year is their first year. Again, like, we haven't had a lot of interaction with them. But they're another team that does very well, historically in the Big 12. But then, they have an 0-4 CFP record. So, again, once they get to the big games, they start playing SEC teams, Big 10 teams, kind of more the higher defensive teams, and they just crumble. But they're always quarterback you and stuff like that. Well, that's Lincoln Riley, and he's no longer there. So, you guys don't really have that, I don't know the word, like, something to brag about as your university, when it was the coach, it was the it was the scheme, and now that's gone. So, and first year in the SEC, you really don't have much to stand on yet.
Right, and like, your coach left for USC. Nearly made the playoffs and then packed his bags and went to USC. So how good is your school really? I know they threw a bag at him, but at the same time, he had it pretty good set up there in the Big 12 with Oklahoma. And, it was pretty easy for them to win 10, 11 games every year. And your coach hightailed over to USC for whatever reason. And, I mean, Oklahoma, they're in that same mold where, like you said, you kind of go to the, what have you guys really won besides your conference championship? Oklahoma, I mean, last year they were complaining that Penn State was ranked ahead of them, even though Oklahoma didn't beat, the only team Oklahoma beat all year was Texas. That was the only really good win that Oklahoma had, and they were complaining toward the end of the year because Penn State got to go to a New Year's Six Bowl. Well, Penn State lost to the number 1 team and the number 6 team in the country. That was our only losses, and both games were somewhat competitive. But besides that, I mean, Penn State kind of won pretty much by double digits in every other game they played. And I just remember toward the end of last season, man, Oklahoma fans just chirped, "How is Penn State ahead of us? How is Penn State ahead of us?" Well, we play a couple decent teams more than you do, and they just got butthurt last year about Penn State being ranked ahead of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, and they might actually fare a little bit better in the SEC with Brent Venables than they would have with like a Lincoln Riley and stuff like that, just because their kind of scheme is better fitted for, like I said, a little bit more defensive play than just an air raid offense.
Yeah, and I think you see that, last year with Lincoln Riley at USC. His team still didn't play defense, ran up against some defensive teams in the Pac-12 that, the defenses stepped up last year in that conference, and, then USC struggles. But yeah, I think Brent Venables going forward to the SEC is probably a better fit for Oklahoma moving to the SEC than Lincoln Riley moving to the SEC with Oklahoma. But, at the same time, it is what it is, and we'll find out soon enough. Moving on to my most annoying fan base in the Big Ten. It's going to get a lot of people upset here because they are chirping all over Twitter right now, and it's Oregon fans. I've never interacted with Oregon fans till this offseason because I never had a need to. And they come in bunches, and they have a high sense of value right now. I get they are coming off an 11-2 season where their only 2 losses were to Washington. But at the same time, you had 2 losses. You didn't win your conference. You didn't make the playoff. I get you had a really good transfer portal season. But, they're out here already claiming Big Ten title this year. And that's going to be hard to do with Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC. It's going to be hard, especially with the different brand of football that Oregon's going to play. I know Dan Lanning comes from the SEC, but Big Ten likes to play defense, likes to bog it down, and you're not going to be this super high scoring team in the Big Ten against most of these top tier teams. These Oregon fans, man, they're crazy. Recruiting, transfer portal, they are NIL. They're into every aspect of this. Uniform, stadiums. They are on Twitter, and they are the best at everything right now, according to them.
Yeah. And and I really think out of the teams coming from the Pac-12 that Oregon will probably have the most success making that transition to Big Ten football. And like I said, I think Dan Lanning is a big reason for that, coming from Georgia, kind of learning under Kirby Smart that, he knows how to adapt. He knows how to change his scheme to the players he's got. And some coaches kind of struggle with that. They strictly recruit for what they want, not, working with what you got. So, but Oregon's another one that's kind of has a different style of fan base, because you get a lot of people that like really don't follow football that much, but they gravitate towards like all the uniform changes, and just the swagger that Oregon brings. So, you have some people that kind of will back them up and defend them, and like they don't even watch their games.
Right. And I mean, if you want to look historically, Oregon has 0 national titles. Now, I get it, if you want to come at me with Penn State, it hasn't been good since the 80s, fine, whatever. I know. We haven't won one in a long time. I get it. I haven't seen it in my lifetime. But Oregon has 0. 0 national titles. So even like historically, to back up, any of the claims, I mean, the most they've made 1 national title game. And besides that, I mean, you've won a conference a couple times, but Oregon will also go through those long streaks of just not being very good as well. It all depends on how good their coach is. Like, for whatever reason, they kind of wax and wane, and they're on the up right now. It'll be really interesting to see what these Oregon fans do if Oregon goes 9-3 or 8-4 and misses the playoffs this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that in today's college football, where you see teams dominate for a handful of years and then just kind of fall right off and then come back just because of the NIL and the transfer portal and stuff like that. I see a lot of programs just kind of come up out of nowhere and then drop back off. One specifically was, Michigan State when Mel Tucker took over. He had a bunch of transfers come in and they had a really great season, and then like it started dwindling very fast, so it's just those things with the portal. You get teams that just fly right up the radar and then fall back down. So it's definitely something to expect in today's college football. Moving to mine, I would say the number one in the SEC would be Tennessee. And and I know I'm a Georgia fan and so that, and I'm sure Alabama fans would agree with me on this one. They're just the most obnoxious, annoying fans that you can imagine. And I remember it wasn't last year, it was the year before that. I think Tennessee was ranked 1 and they kicked Georgia down to like 4-3, and they were just mad dogging everybody. And we ended up beating that, winning that game, and they didn't even make the playoffs. And that was probably their best season in a decade. And going back to like their most recent success, they haven't won the SEC alone since like 1998. So and they're another team that's never even made the playoffs, which I'm sure will change here soon with the extended playoffs. But yeah, Tennessee is just one of those schools that you can scream the loudest, but on the field the results show it, show themselves.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely fun when they pull their one upset a year or every couple years, whenever they end up beating Alabama, or whenever they beat, like when they beat Alabama, was it last year or whatever, and they took the uprights to the river.
Yeah. Well, I think that was actually 2 years ago. That was the same year that they got bumped up to number 1 overall late in the season, and then ran into Georgia, and then kind of really hit the bed against South Carolina, and then Hooker got hurt. So
yeah, like I don't see too much of them on Twitter because I'm just not, they're not popping up on my For You page, but I do know I enjoyed them carrying a field goal post all the way to a river.
Yeah, it was definitely something to see.
All right, so that rounds out our most annoying fan bases, and the Big Ten and SEC, I'm going with number 3 is going to be USC, number 2 Michigan, and number 1 is Oregon for me in the Big Ten. And Jay, you want to recap yours?
Yep. So I had Florida at 3, Oklahoma at 2, and then Tennessee as the worst annoying fan base in the SEC.
All right, so there you have our most annoying fan bases. Now let's move on to over and unders and which teams we like for betting purposes on their regular season win totals. First one I have is going to be the Iowa over 7.5 wins. I mean, last season they went 10-4. They made the Big Ten championship game, and then they lost their bowl game. So that was 2 of their losses was a conference title game in a bowl game. So I mean, just regular season they were 10-2 and had no quarterback once again. So I'm looking at their schedule and their win total being 7.5. I mean, they have Illinois State, Troy, Michigan State, Northwestern, UCLA, Maryland, and Minnesota as, 7 right there that they're going to be favored in. They go against Washington, which they'll probably be favored in. So right there would be 8 games they're favored in. And probably what's the most important for them is they avoid Michigan, they avoid Penn State, they avoid USC, and they avoid Oregon. So the only big dog that Iowa sees all season is going to be Ohio State. And they have their interstate rivalry with Iowa State, which Iowa's kind of had the better hand in lately. But looking at Iowa's schedule and how it all breaks down, missing, 4 of the 5 big dogs in the conference, catching just Ohio State, I already put money on the Iowa over 7.5. Like, I feel really good about that and have no issue. If you look at their schedule, Iowa could very easily go 11-1 and be in a Big Ten title game, even though we don't want that at all in the Big Ten. Do not give me Iowa under any circumstances in the Big Ten title game again. Like the Big Ten West, we finally got rid of the division. I don't want to see Big Ten West in the conference title game, but I could definitely see Oregon going 11-1 or 10-2 with the schedule and how much they're bringing back and what they're bringing back.
Yeah, and I was actually looking at that, and I was actually surprised that Iowa won 10 games last year because, they had some of the lowest scoring games that you have ever seen in college football, especially today's college football. So to see that they actually won 10 games last year is actually kind of eye-opening. But I 100% agree with you. If, like I said, especially if McNamara, if he can stay healthy, if he can stay healthy and have just, like you said, a little bit above average quarterback play, I think, like I said, they exceed that over, very easily.
Yeah, and I mean, they could have a quarterback battle brewing too, because they just got Brennan Sullivan from Northwestern in the transfer portal. So, I mean, if Cade's not healthy or if he's just not getting it done, Sullivan gives them a more mobile option. And I mean, he won some games over at Northwestern last year, and that was with a kind of poor defense at Northwestern. So you put him in the Iowa offense, and with that defense that's historically, always good, you might have a quarterback battle in Iowa, and that doesn't change my thoughts at all about them going over 7.5 wins.
Yeah, absolutely. Competition, is not always a bad thing to have. It's kind of a good problem to have when you have, 2 good quarterbacks that could possibly start for you with a historic struggling offensive team. It's not it's a good problem to have. To shoot over to the SEC, my favorite over would be Ole Miss. It's currently at 9.5 right now. Last year they went 11-2. Their only losses was to Alabama and to Georgia last year. They come into 2024 with the number 1 transfer class. They have the second easiest SEC schedule. So I think that, like you said, they'd almost have to have a down year to be under 9.5. And I really, as a Georgia fan, I really think that Ole Miss will be in the SEC championship game. And like I said, they got really the only like up in the air games is they have Georgia, but they have Georgia at home. That's a home game for Ole Miss. And then they have LSU away. So those games I feel could go either way. So I think, like I said, I think 9.5 is an absolute steal.
Yeah, and you just hope, if any of those marginal or up in the air games that, Lane Kiffin stays Lane Kiffin instead of kind of going into the shell of himself he did against Alabama and Georgia last year.
Yeah, exactly.
My next one in the Big Ten, I'm going to go with the Indiana over 4.5. They went 3-9 last year, fired Tom Allen and, transfer portal out and in. But I'm looking at their schedule. I'm a really big fan of their coach, Phil Seghetti. The guy, all he's ever done is win, no matter where he goes. I mean, he's a little longer in the tooth. He's getting a little older, but he's finally getting that chance at a power conference. And all this guy's done is win in his entire college career. And looking at Indiana, they still have some talent there. If you look at their schedule, they get Florida International, Western Illinois, Charlotte, Michigan State, UCLA, Northwestern, Maryland, and Purdue. Between those games, I think you could find 5 wins for them. I think you can look at Florida International as a win. You can look at Western Illinois as a win. Charlotte as a win. UCLA could be a win. Purdue really struggled last year and hasn't really looked like they're going to improve a ton. Maryland's a huge unknown. Michigan State still, I don't think, is as talented as they need to be. So I'm literally looking at Indiana's schedule. I mean, they're going to struggle against the good teams, that's for sure. But I think there's enough mediocre to bad teams on their schedule that they can get to 5 and 7 and hit the over on the 4.5.
Yeah, I think you're right. And like you said, I think there's just a perfect amount of games that can go either way. That will push them over to 5 wins at least. Like you said, especially against Charlotte, Charlotte, Western Illinois. And like you said, Maryland lost a lot, and Purdue, they lost their whole coaching staff, and they're kind of rebuilding that program with the new staff from last year. So, yeah, they have a lot of games that they could turn the tide and win. Go on a little winning streak, get hot, and win some of those, Michigan State, UCLA's, those type games that could go either way.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead with your next one.
Yeah, I just didn't know if you had anything to add to that one.
No,
so,
it's hard to tell when we're done with it.
It's all right. I just didn't know if I lost connection with you or not. So moving forward with mine, I have Auburn under 7.5. They went 6-7 last year. I do like Hugh Freeze as a coach. I think he he brings kind of a different aspect to the SEC with Auburn. I just think that Auburn has kind of lost some of their kind of swagger and their prestige on the recruiting train to get really good talent in. So, I kind of have them, they got to play Alabama, they got to play Georgia, Missouri is coming off a really good year. And even Oklahoma and Kentucky, they could be under, kind of the up in the air kind of games. But like I said, Kentucky was strong in the transfer portal as well. So I could see Kentucky winning that one. So really, I only have them like as a definite win against like their non-conference games, which would be Alabama, A&M, Cal, in New Mexico, and then I have them most likely winning against Vanderbilt and LA Monroe. But they also have to go to Texas A&M and then Arkansas. For whatever reason, Arkansas always plays Auburn tough when they see each other. So that's why I kind of put it in as a kind of a coin flip game that it could go either way.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem with Auburn was their quarterback play last year with Peyton Thorne, never really getting it going, and they didn't address it at all in the transfer portal, which was super surprising. And then you hear Hugh Freeze come out and say they're not buying a quarterback. So that's why they didn't. That's why they didn't make a move there at quarterback. So you're rolling in with the same quarterbacks that were on the roster last year and expecting a lot of different results. And I don't know if that's going to be there for them. They went 6-7, and you're asking them to win 8 games this year. That's going to be kind of tough, especially when you didn't improve at the most important position.
Yeah, and it's surprising to see him not really, dive into the NILs and the transfer portals. Just kind of the stubborn, old school type of way. Like you said, well, we're not going to buy one. We'll develop one or whatever. But results are on the field.
Yeah, definitely. And now I actually have an under. I'm going with the Minnesota under 5.5. Minnesota struggled last year, kind of for the first real time under PJ Fleck. They went 6-7 last year. Looking at their schedule, I don't see a ton of, solid, give me wins on their schedule. They get Rhode Island, Nevada, UCLA, Maryland, and Rutgers. And that was like the only 5 wins I could find on their schedule. And I'm not 100% sold on, Rutgers, and we don't know what Maryland really is yet. So if I'm looking at their schedule, I only really see Rhode Island and Nevada as wins. UCLA is probably going to be pretty even with the turnover at that program. And then, like I said, with the unknowns of Maryland, Rutgers, even if they win those games, they're only at 5 wins. And that if they finish 5-7, that cashes on that under. So that was kind of the one under I seen in the Big Ten where I'm like, that's a pretty good possibility of staying under 5.5.
Yeah, and I think really a lot of that falls on their quarterback play that's going to come out of Minnesota. They went and got a transfer portal guy coming out of the FCS, and you're going to put him in arguably one of the hardest defensive playing conferences. I usually, I don't think that's going to transpire very easily with quick success. And I could be wrong. The kid can play. He has a really good highlight reel. But if you're going week in and week out, and the dog days of October, November games when they matter the most, and you're in the Big Ten, average quarterback play is just not going to cut it.
Yeah, like you gotta get some skill players out there on both sides of the ball, and I just don't see Minnesota having those. So let's go ahead with your final one to route us out.
Yep, I'm gonna follow that one up with an under of my own. And this one's an ugly one. It's Vanderbilt under 2.5. They finished the 2023 season at 2-10. Like you said, they're just not a strong program. They've been a bottom feeder to the SEC for as long as I can remember. But the only coin flip games I see is Georgia State and Ball State. So I have them winning against Alcorn State. But they go through a gauntlet, Virginia Tech to start out the year. Like you said, Missouri coming off a really good year. Alabama and Kentucky, Texas, Auburn, South Carolina, LSU. They play a really hard schedule. And for a bottom feeder, like I said, it's just so unlikely that they can win against a Virginia Tech who's bringing back like 18, 19 players. Missouri's coming off a big year that, that coach has been really good for that Missouri team. And then obviously Texas and Alabama, that's just an LSU. Just the talent itself is going to, they can have a bad day and still beat Vanderbilt.
Yeah, the crazy thing with Vanderbilt is they just never have that one like outlier season. Like Northwestern will have that outlier season, every couple of years or every, it seems like. And they're basically the same. Northwestern and Vanderbilt, high academic schools that struggle to get talent, but for whatever reason, Northwestern will have that outlier good season, and Vanderbilt doesn't. I mean, I think the last time Vanderbilt made a bowl game was when James Franklin was there and used that as a stepping stone to get to Penn State. It's very hard to play in the SEC, and beat these top tier programs, but just to never really get that big season every once in a while is kind of strange.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think it's just going to get worse for them as the transfer portal and the NIL comes in. I know personally, like I said, Georgia went and got one of their top wide receivers off of that team. So any good talent that they do get and put on the field, it's just a free agency for the other SEC teams to recruit them back over.
Right. Thanks for developing this guy. We'll take it from here.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so that rounds out our over-unders. Now let's move on to our best portal fits. I'll get us started here with some more outside looking in. I got 3 portal fits of some guys, I'm not going to rank them, but just some, like honorable mention ones. I have Julian Fleming, wide receiver, moving from Ohio State to Penn State. Just really fits with what Penn State needs. They need a veteran presence in the wide receiver room, and that's exactly what they got. My other one is Will Rogers, quarterback, went from Mississippi State to Washington. Nice little filler there for the new coaching staff with Jedd Fisch. Get that experienced quarterback to replace Michael Penix and kind of, stabilize that program with them losing so much. And then I have another quarterback here on the outside looking in, Aidan Chiles, quarterback going from Oregon State to Michigan State. He's following his coach over, so he'll know the scheme, he'll know the system. He might be running for his life this year, but Michigan State really needed that quarterback with some talent, and I think Aidan Chiles provides Michigan State with a talented quarterback, even though he is young.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest impact one is Julian Fleming to Penn State. I obviously tuned into when Penn State played Ohio State, and Michigan was one of their 2 biggest games last year, and especially against the Ohio State game, it's like they didn't have a completed pass that seemed like over 25 yards. It's just none of their wide receivers getting open. Drew Allar was just having a hard time finding open wide receivers. So I think, trying to revamp that wide receiving core is going to be a huge priority for Penn State to, to find some success there on offense. And I agree with the Aidan Chiles, like you said, just following your coach. It's a good thing. It's a comfort, for the coach and the quarterback to, kind of both transfer to a new school and kind of, start doing things your own way.
Right. Aidan Chiles can provide the culture. He already knows the culture the head coach is trying to set up. He already knows what that is, and he can lead by example because he's been in the system. And then there's reports coming out from Penn State that Julian Fleming, teaching them to use the advanced jugs machine that Penn State's never used. I mean, he's bringing all the things that the top wide receivers, there's a reason why Ohio State always has the best wide receiver room in the nation, and he's going to bring some of that experience over.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of my notable transfers that I think are just going to have immediate impact. First off would be Walter Nolan. He's a 5-star, defensive lineman. Highly recruited for the Texas A&M. He's making a move to Ole Miss, playing for Lane Kiffin. He's also going to pair up with Prince, who's an edge rusher, 4-star from Florida, is also moving to Ole Miss. This is Lane Kiffin, and his new defensive coordinator he got from Alabama, trying to fill in these massive gaps they have on their defense. I think that was one of their biggest issues last year, especially playing against Alabama and Georgia, was their defense. I think in total defense, they ranked out of the top 50. In the SEC, you got to be able to stop them too. You can't just try to score more points than the other guy. You got to be able to put up stops efficiently and more consistently. So I think those 2 will definitely make an immediate impact for that Ole Miss team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Lane Kiffin and I think it's called the Oak Grove Collective over there, definitely flexing their muscles this offseason, bringing in a ton of talent to help Ole Miss get to where they want to be. And that's what's going to be kind of cool about the NIL is you're going to see some outliers that, have the boosters or the fans that can really support it. You're going to get Ole Miss to jump up. Oregon's got Phil Knight, so they're going to jump up. So it's going to be really interesting to see which programs, embrace it and their boosters embrace it, and which programs don't, and they'll fall down. Getting back to our rankings here for the transfer portal, my number 3 is going to be Caleb Downs, who went from Alabama to Ohio State. It really was a position of need for Ohio State, bringing Caleb Downs in at safety. And, I mean, he proved as a true freshman. I mean, he got on the field at Alabama. He was all over the field against Michigan in the semifinal. So he's definitely super talented. And he, like I said, he fits a position of need at Ohio State. And it's going to really help that defense. And I mean, you look at Ohio State and everything they brought in and what they bring back, Ohio State's defense could be one of the top in the nation, and Caleb Downs will be a big reason for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Ohio State was definitely they made it a point to go get these guys that they wanted. They were very active, getting more transfers into Ohio State and revamping that team. And what better way to get some guys from, Alabama, a Nick Saban guy for sure. But moving back over to the SEC, I would say another 2 that have probably like the highest impact would be Isaiah Bond, wide receiver that was a 5-star from Bama, moving to Texas. Texas lost two wide receivers in the draft. I think they lost their tight end as well. So, Isaiah Bond, I think, will have an immediate impact on that Texas team, on that wide receiver core. And another one would be Keon Sabb, safety from Michigan. He's moving to Alabama. Like you said, obviously, with them losing their safety, Alabama's safety, that Keon Sabb, he's a dog. He can play. I think it was a huge veteran move to get him on the field for Alabama, kind of moving into that new era without Nick Saban.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Isaiah Bond, that was super surprising that he even got into the portal and transferred from Alabama to Texas. And then with Keon Sabb, I mean, he saw the field some over there at Michigan, but he was behind, arguably the best defense in the nation last year. So that was very, very good get there as well for Alabama. Moving on to my number 2 best portal fit in the Big Ten, I have Dillon Gabriel, quarterback who transferred Oklahoma to Oregon. He kind of seen the writing on the wall with Jackson Arnold and how much Oklahoma liked him, and Oregon needed a quarterback. With Bo Nix being drafted in the first round, Dillon Gabriel brings a ton of experience. I mean, this guy's the next Sean Clifford, and he's been in the college football for 6-7 years. He's been UCF, Oklahoma, and now he's over at Oregon. It fits, obviously Oregon needs a quarterback. With Bo Nix leaving, now they got one who's got a lot of experience, and we know he can sling the ball all over the place. And while they develop Dante Moore for the future, they got Dillon Gabriel as that stopgap in what could be a special year over at Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people kind of underestimate Gabriel, and I think he's kind of been overlooked, honestly, and kind of underrated. So it'll be interesting to see, what he can do inheriting a good Oregon team. I see Oregon, being a top 3 team in the Big Ten this upcoming year. So I think it was a really good transfer get. With losing Bo Nix for sure. So let's see, the second ranked one that I got would be Domani Jackson, a corner that transferred from USC, and he's going to go to Alabama. Alabama lost, 2 really big corners in the draft with Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid. So I think, being able to basically rebuild that secondary with the transfer portal obviously is a priority for that Alabama team to just try to rebuild that defense.
Yeah, and I mean, Domani was highly sought after. His final 2 was Penn State and USC. It really, sucked that we lost him to USC. But, I mean, he was kind of one of the lone bright spots on that defense over at SC last year. And he should fit in perfectly with what Alabama needs there after their losses in the offseason. Moving on to my top portal fit, I'm gonna stay in the Pacific Northwest on wide receiver Evan Stewart, who transferred Texas A&M to Oregon. Oregon's building the beast out there, and they arguably got the best wide receiver available. Evan Stewart's gonna provide them with that deep downfield presence, and he's gonna really open up the offense for new quarterback Dillon Gabriel. And I really think that was the best fit of a transfer in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like you said, he's just gonna, like you said, the rich gets richer with Oregon. Really attacking that the transfer portal and being able to reload and not rebuild with that Dan Lanning team for sure. Moving on to mine. Like I said, I really didn't rank mine in order either. But I have Trevor Etienne, running back coming from Florida to Georgia. He's definitely going to have an impact, but Georgia, has classically been, always has a deep running back room. We ran the duo, last year with Milton and Edwards. We've had Chubb and Gurley and Sony Michel and all those guys. We've always had, kind of a running back by committee, the last few years. And I think Trevor just brings that extra with the being able to catch out of the backfield, his receiving abilities. He's very elusive. And then we have Bradrick Robinson and Branson Robinson, who are kind of more power backs that can, be kind of the opposite of what Etienne brings for that Georgia team.
Yeah. When you look at Georgia, they always have a good offensive line. So kind of any running back they bring in is going to succeed there and have a really good template for success there. So just in review, Jay, I'm going to make you rank them. So better get your ranking ready. My third best portal fit is going to be Caleb Downs. My second best portal fit is Dillon Gabriel. And my top portal fit is Evan Stewart.
All right. I would say my third would be Domani Jackson, going from USC to Alabama to rebuild that secondary. My second would be Walter Nolan, big defensive lineman for Ole Miss, trying to get, stop the run, get pressure on the quarterback. And then my number one would be Isaiah Bond, the wide receiver from going to Bama to Texas. They really have to rebuild that wide receiver room, and I think he can definitely bring a lot to that room, and I think he will have a direct impact with that Texas team.
All right, so there you have it. There's our best portal fits in the Big Ten and SEC. That'll do it for our show this week. We're trying to launch every Friday. We thank you guys for watching, listening, and continue to like and subscribe. And once again, thank you guys for listening.
Yep. See you next week.